This is the vegan anarchist, and in this dark, brooding video, we will expose the fascists within us. Get ready.
I guess that's one way to start off a video.
Yeah, why the fuck not? Am I right?
Well, I mean, I'm also pretty sure my whole rant probably made it in.
Yeah,
The
probably.
fascist within. The fascist within. The fascist within. The fascist within.
All right.
All right, that's enough dilly-dallying.
Okay. So Bobby wanted to talk about the psychology of authoritarianism, and I think I'm going to talk about like moralism and its relationship to political philosophy. And I have no,
class.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
have no idea what you guys are doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's like I've always been very fascinated. Like even before I became a libertarian, like I mean I've always had somewhat of a libertarian authority skeptical consciousness, but like it developed more over time, obviously, as I learned more about the nature of politics and the violence inherent to political authority. And like there's this very vulgar tendency within humans to imagine authority as alien, and this tendency in and of itself feeds in to authoritarianism, right? Because there's this tendency within humankind to externalize authoritarian pressures and authoritarian violence, but the very difficult thing is acknowledging that we all have that potential for authoritarian violence, and this is why for instance, the anti SJW community has gained such ground on YouTube over the years, because that sort of a mindset, this sort of, anti-PC, anti-feminist, anti-pacifism, anti-liberalism, and xenophobic mindset, it appeals to the shadow side we all possess within us. It appeals simultaneously to the id and the superego, because that is the nature of far-right politics. That is the nature of fascism. It derives its power from our natural instinct to fear those who are different.
Yeah, and there's like many experiments that I've read in psychology, like the Milgram experiment, and there's a few other ones which involve fake electric shocks. You guys know about those experiments?
Yeah, I do.
You're referring to like the prison experiments and things like that?
Yeah, the prisons, the Milgrams, the various different, the Ash line experiment thingy.
Yeah.
I mean, we have kind of experimented in that, and people would willingly submit to authority, and some guy in a lab coat to do some pretty heinous stuff just to torture
Yeah.
people.
Well, we found this.
Yeah, and it would. Yeah, and the thing is, like people, like 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 people have to sort of have a certain amount of energy to think intuitively and think on a more complex dimension. And I have that ability, like pretty much everyone in this room has that ability and that capacity and that willingness, but most people do not. Most people, um, most people just, as um, as Bionic Dance likes to say, run on automatic. Most people, um, most people have a very hard time questioning authority. They like, and it's not that people don't have a natural curiosity, because we all do have that, but our willingness to explore that differs from person to person. And there has always been this mentality within humankind since we developed sapiens, um, that ever since we developed sapiens and evolved to such a point beyond all the other primates, um, like, and I'm well aware, by the way, that there are other primates that are capable of rudimentary thinking and and feeling and empathy and such. I'm well aware of that. But what I'm saying is humans are capable of of a far more complex thought process than any other primate on the planet. And because of this, we are able to develop moral systems, political systems,
A lot of it
religious
has a lot of
systems.
a lot of the political and moral and religious system has to deal with death anxiety. And there's this interesting theory that I've heard about a long time ago called terror management theory. And
Mhm.
that a lot of our religions and culture is a result of people being scared of death and trying to prolong their life even after physical death in some way.
Oh yeah, that's been a psychological fact for centuries.
I think that propertarianism is also like kind of a result of people having like material anxieties and and social anxieties as well, probably. I'll probably talk about that a lot later, though.
The idea of I put risk into this. I risked so much for this. I do not want to lose it. I do not want someone else to reap the main rewards from this. I want to reap as much reward from this because I risked a lot for this.
Hmm. And also, it's very interesting that a lot of these white dominant um, nations tend to say things to the effect of um, oh, we're just trying to preserve our culture, yeah, like what about the indigenous Americans who were trying to
Preserve their
to
culture.
do the exact same thing during the time of
Colonialism. I mean, during the time of colonization and the times of genocide.
yeah.
I mean, and the thing is that they actually had an external threat to their culture. They had a group of people who had come from another continent who basically have this idea of manifest destiny, of going across to the other coast. They have this idea of that's manifest destiny. This is an external threat to the Native Americans because the European settlers, the white men who had come, are now going to take this land by whatever means, even if this means that even if this is through genocide. This is where you get stuff like the Indian Removal Act, for example, where we basically decided we are going to expand. Native Americans be damned. They actually had an external threat to their culture. White people do not have an external threat to their culture at the moment. I know a lot of people argue that there is from Islam, but there is no statistical evidence backing it up. There's no decline in the amount of white people. There might be decline in percentages as populations in other places grow, but that's not a decline in population. That's a decline in percentage. And I would say that the decline in percentage isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think it's part of what happens when society becomes when a society becomes a bit more advanced. You have stuff like birth control that comes along, and that lowers the birth rate. It doesn't completely stagnate it. People are still going to be born. You're still going to have population growth, but population growth has slowed down a bit. It's not an actual external threat to our culture, but if you allow someone to believe that there is an external threat to their culture, they often are willing to turn towards authoritarians who are telling them this, and they're going to say, how can you help us preserve our country? How can you help us preserve our culture? And will you save us? The psychology of we don't want to leave. People have this anxiety that, like, if they think they are threatened in any way, and this threat can be completely non-existent, but being told that this threat exists is usually enough for them to say, who will save us, and put money on the next person who comes by. Decide that Trump is going to save the U.S. from Muslims. Now, there is not an external threat to the U.S. from Muslims. There are some people in, like, the Middle East who have external threats on their life from specific Islamists because they live in an area. But I'd say that most of the people who have external threats caused by Muslims are other Muslims. They're not white people.
Right. Exactly.
There's a few attacks in Europe here and there, but most of the attacks happen in the areas where ISIS lives. It's other Muslims who are the main victims of ISIS.
Yeah.
But we've taken this and we've atomized it, and we've created authority and strongmen out of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And often to take us in a different directions, those who seek to gain a power and control would often create narratives through the mass media, through our culture, to perpetuate the idea of victimization or existential threat when there isn't, or if there maybe be one, but it's exaggerated.
It's far easier to blame foreigners for economic and political, calamity rather than to actually have to take a hard, skeptical look at your
And
society and how it organizes itself.
it's hard to accept that the actual threat to your way of life may be on your doorstep as opposed to being in some distant land.
Yeah, I mean, besides like the quote unquote race mixing of the world, I think is inevitable, and race is like largely a social construct, anyways.
Yeah.
And there's no
White
fundamental
people wouldn't
biological.
even exist if it weren't for race mixing.
Yeah,
Exactly.
there's no fundamental biological difference between people of different races, so it's all just bullshit, anyways.
All of the biological differences between people of different quote unquote races, one, it's smaller than the difference than you would get from different subspecies. So we're all within the same subspecies. Yeah, sorry, race realists. We are the same. We are all the same subspecies. So, it's like a point
I mean,
one. It's like a 0.01 or
I
a
mean,
point.
almost any group that refers to themselves as realist is not at all.
Yeah,
I did notice that. Yeah.
but yeah. Also,
I don't accept realism as a legitimate concept anyways, um as a postmodernist and everything. But yeah, like realism is just shit in general.
but yeah, the thing too is that if you actually look at if you look at most people, you're going to find that race mixing isn't this new thing that just came around. It's a thing that's been happening for thousands of years. Whenever people of different from different areas,
Ethnicities.
different ethnicities, different areas of the globe meet each other. Yeah, flat Earth is just a globe. Sorry, I'm off topic every time I do that, but yeah, around the globe, we see that these people that mating tends to happen between like whenever we see this with other animals too. But yeah, all of the genetic difference that we have can be accounted for with the genetic drift that happens when you have people in different when you have different sets of animals within the same environment. So this is basically, we've made a social construct around the slight differences that people have that are based off of the environment that they're from.
Exactly.
We've decided that since people of African descent have darker skin, they are somehow inferior and different than us, and ew, get away from me, yucky. Like that's
Yeah.
kind of what we've decided. Like little children, like ew.
I mean, I've never been like that. Like personally,
No, I don't mean like children are like that with race, but I mean like when children kind of like some children when they come across something they're like that's yucky.
yeah,
It
I know what you're saying, but at the same time, like like from a very young age, like the thing is, as I've gotten older, I've been somewhat I've been some like especially in my more reactionary phase, um I've been somewhat influenced by racist ideas that at the time I didn't really consciously realize were racist, but yeah, like from a very young age, I very much had an anti-racist consciousness. Um, like like I like like my mom like my mom who who can be somewhat subconsciously racist just because of the era in which he was brought up and everything. Like, and also because she lived through the OJ trial, that was a big part of it as well.
Well, I imagine that the OJ trial didn't help racists. Like, I mean, a lot of people have what's the word for it? Like, a lot of people have or everybody to some extent has confirmation bias. So,
Mhm.
like, for racists, I imagine the OJ trial probably like confirmed their views about how toxic affirmative action is and how we just let a man off because he was black. Obviously, there was more to it. It wasn't because he was black. It was because he was a well-known athlete. People thought of him as a nice man. I mean, later there's been evidence that since the trial has kind of showed that he was more than likely guilty for the murder.
Right.
Guys, Gillig reactionary put anti-racist consciousness in triple parentheses. Do I just put him in timeout?
Yeah, the fucking
Free speech, man. It's a spook.
the tools. No
Yeah,
plan.
and anyways, we're kind of getting off topic here.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, like I've
that's right. There was something that I wanted to state about authoritarianism, especially since you said something when titling this video. We titled it "Psychology of Authoritarianism," and when we were talking about getting this hangout, basically with authoritarian or with a part of it is that we all seem to have a bit of like an inner authoritarian. And this has been demonstrated quite famously by the Stanford prison experiments, where they had students from Stanford. Half of them acted like prison guards, the other half acted like prisoners. And the ones who were playing the role of prisoner or prison guards started to get brutal and even abuse some of them. So they had to even, it got so bad that they had to end the experiment prematurely because they did not expect it. So authority is something that has to be questioned. That has to be questioned and has to meet a burden of proof at all times. Because if not, you end up in situations where someone who is role playing as a prison guard starts to act abusive as a prison guard and starts to abuse their power.
I was just gonna say, I've always viewed the Stanford experiments as more of a reason why I hold extreme skepticism of the ethical practices of some aspects of the psychology, like psychology culture, especially like. I mean, if you want to talk about authoritarianism, you can just view like a lot of the like latent and like not so subtle ableism within like psychology education on a lot of college campuses.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
People weren't forgetting that long ago, like mentally ill people, especially mentally ill people, were routinely had eugenics experiments performed on them. So
Yeah, like in the 50s, autistic people like myself and there's three out of four of us are artistic, and the other one is another type of neurodivergence. So we would have been experimented on.
Well, I mean, there were I'm trying to remember. This was somewhere in Pennsylvania. There's this old place that well, I mean, I heard about it because of a thing that I was watching about like supposed hauntings and stuff around there, but there was some pretty horrific shit that went on there, which can tie into both authoritarianism and into ableism, but Pedro brought up the eugenics thing, which, yeah, the eugenics definitely. Eugenics was a pretty big role in it, and even this place didn't get shut down until the 80s, but like early in its heyday, this was like just before World War II. This place was set up in the late 1800s, so in like just before World War II, when eugenics first started to come around, this was a place. All of the patients at this place would be forcefully sterilized. Not to mention all the overcrowding and stuff, but they would literally sterilize these people for being quote unquote mentally retarded.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was obviously the whole mental retardation thing was a very arbitrary designation, and it fit a broad range of people, as Vegan was talking about. But I mean, even then, when that stopped, there were plenty of people who at that I mean, I'm just going to call it an asylum and not a mental institution, because it acted much more as like an old school asylum than it did a mental institution. So it was basically, the thing with this asylum is that a lot of the guards were very abusive and negligent. It got super overcrowded at one point. For like years, it was overcrowded, and they would just leave kids who, some of them were even slightly verbal before going in, but after years of not interacting with people, had no verbal skills. But these kids would, like, because they were left alone and never got any actual care, they would be living in like total squalor. They would get beaten by guards. They would be beaten by staff, beaten, raped, anything. Like, the staff basically had free reign to do whatever they wanted to these children, and oh my god, it was really fucking brutal what some of them did to kids. Of course, it got shut down when it got exposed on the news, like some of the stuff that they were doing. But like some of these kids would like be rolling around in their own shit, like literal human shit. They would like plaster their shit on the walls. Like this is what happens when it's one reason I'm skeptical of authority, especially an authority that has to be authority over more than one person other than themselves. If they have to be an authority over multiple people because the staff were way outnumbered by the kids, they can easily just end up completely being negligent, not caring, and even just outright abusing the children. And I mean, I would say that this plays a little bit into authoritarianism, which is that if you give people free reign in their authority, there's a high possibility that at least some people are going to abuse it.
Mm-hmm.
And these were like relatively normal people who were staff, who turned into horrid individuals because they decided, like, hey, that nobody cares about this mentally ill kid, so I can literally forcefully penetrate this kid. No one's going to care. No one's going to do anything. No one's going to arrest me.
Yeah. Like, that's another that's another thing about authority. Like the longer one has access to authority, and like brain scans like there have actually been brain scans of done of people with less authority and people with more authority that demonstrates this, and 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 the results are pretty consistent. Um, like people with less authority tend overall to be more patient, more empathetic, more kind, um, more willing to share, more altruistic. People with more authority, however, tend to be less empathetic, um, less patient. They tend to be very aggressive. They tend to be um, they tend to be very narcissistic in many instances. They and the more authority they have and the more money they have, the less they're willing to give up, the the less they're willing to sacrifice, the less they're willing to share, the less they're willing to get along with others, and the more they're willing to exploit, the more they're willing to rob, the more they're willing to cheat and lie and manipulate to get what they want.
Which is basically what the whole capitalist class do anyways, so.
Exactly.
I mean, they have observing even baboons that hierarchies are more hierarchical, a specific family structure is, the more stressed out and the ones in the bottom are, and the more violent it tends to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh yeah.
But
I don't think-
natural hierarchy.
Well, it's funny to see natural hierarchies when even our closest ape and like our closest basically primate ancestors are even or basically don't even do as well in more hierarchical situations. It actually hurts a lot of them more stress hormones.
Yep.
yeah, there has been research into like the science of social domination, especially psychologically.
Yeah, and also there's been like there have been studies that show a correlation between authoritarianism and prejudice as well, and that's where you sort of like um get into like the psychological roots of fascism, which is the main topic I wish to discuss. Like the like like because that's another trait that has been linked to authoritarianism: xenophobia, racism, homophobia. I I mean, like that's not to say, of course, these things do not exist the in the regular everyday population. They certainly do. However, if you notice amongst authority figures like cops, military personnel, especially the really high-ranking ones, government agents, um, media, um, media even, like people, like newscasters, actors, not actors, but well, some actors, but more so like directors, producers, there's this kind of idea of the liberal media, and that idea is very much invalidated by the fact that if you look at how liberal ideas and far left ideas are treated in the media generally, they are not portrayed in a very flattering light at all. I mean, aside from more independent media, but outside of that, whenever you see a Hollywood film dealing with liberals and far leftists, they tend to be portrayed in a very stereotypical, negative, and insulting manner.
Yeah, I mean, it's no real secret that like institutions of oppression seep into our mass media culture as well. You know, the idea of the liberal media, you know, is pretty funny.
You must ignore the liberal media because those anarchists and communists and degenerates.
If the media is liberal in any way, it's quote unquote liberal to the extent that diversity, and I use that term very liberally to make a pun, is marketable. That's it. That's the only reason.
Exactly. And um exactly, it's because it's not that the media is it's not that the media is big on tolerance or diversity in general. Like if you've ever seen how actors talk in their personal lives, like holy fuck, like most actors are reactionary as hell, and I'm not even just talking the religious ones.
Oh yeah, when you hear a lot of actors outside, like in private, a lot of times you're like, I did not know that I went on to r/NRX, or that I went into Twitter, that I searched NRX on YouTube. Also, just letting you know, vegan, Gaelic neo-reactionaries,
Back on
they'll-
I see him.
yeah,
Someone posted it's not liberal media, it's like Jewish media. Yeah, it sounds like I'm just gonna kick
sounds anti-Semitic, but okay.
timeout. Gulag. Why isn't this guy in timeout?
I don't know why you would. I don't know why you would time out him and just block him. I mean, neo-reactionary is in the fucking name.
Yeah, well, he subscribed to me and he leaves all those fashy comments. Yeah, how about how many films fascists in the media? How many open fascists are in the media? How many films are glorifying fascism?
I don't know.
Well,
Birth of one, you know, there's one right there. Birth of a Nation is seen as by and large one of the hallmarks of cinematic history and of American film culture. So,
Which
Yeah.
was totally a glorification of fascism.
Yeah, and like there and like a lot of yeah, and if you look at a lot of utopian films from like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, like a lot of utopian films implicitly promote this very kind of fascist worldview. you know, this this whole world in which everybody's white, everybody's polite, everybody follows the laws to the letter no matter what. Um everybody everybody likes the leader. Everybody does what their does what their role in society prescribed for them by the ruling class tells them to do, and doesn't strive for anything else because, you know, that would be dangerous.
Well, yeah. What's funny is I think that I saw this video on Knowledge Hub, which I mean is a pretty interesting channel that talks about history. But yeah, actually bringing up the whole idea behind utopia had specific stuff like everybody when they first enter the society would spend 2 years as a slave. Like it had little things that like that the whole story of utopia to many would be considered a dystopia today by many people because it was anti-Semitic, it was racist, it hated specific groups of people, so it wasn't real. So it's kind of funny that we've chosen that like utopia as our definition for like a perfect society. But yeah, I feel like that kind of diverges a little bit. But yeah, I mean, the idea of a utopia is about like 500 years old. I probably completely simplified it, and even like I don't think I'm doing it any justice of explaining it, but that it to most people it would be considered. Oh, it was also anti-atheist.
Oh yeah.
It said I accept. It basically was like we accept all religions except for the non-religious. So it was basically we accept all religions, but we will not allow the non-religious, those who don't follow a religion because they are immoral.
To be fair, though, like often part that the fascism that's essential to fascism that often gets neglected mention is organicism, because often people mention like racism when that's more have to do with Hitler's brand of fascism, which is like everybody's like a cell, and if you don't serve the race or the nation, you're a parasite, must be killed, kind of thing.
Oh
Like
yeah.
like society does not exist for just. I mean, people don't exist just to be a servant to society. Society exists to help people meet their needs so they can live their lives in the most pleasurable, meaning way possible.
Yeah. I mean, the reason we formed society was to serve people, and people weren't made to serve society. And I think that's something that's largely forgotten. Or actually, I think the authoritarian tendencies have kind of basically said, well, my authoritarianism serves society and serves people at large, so therefore. But I mean, societies, like even other like what would seem like a society for animals, where we see animals cooperating. The cooperation isn't for weak animals to just serve everything, and that if they can't serve it. No, the whole point of that grouping is so that weaker animals are looked at. And like we see this in other species, that the weaker animals are the ones who are, it's essentially for the benefit of the weak, not for the benefit of the strong.
Well, also more
That's the reason
cooperative species, as Peter Kropotkin pointed out, and has been confirmed dozens and dozens of times since, that more cooperative species tend to be more likely to take over a niche and more likely to be successful in the long run than like species that are very.
The whole point of society is for cooperation, and the point of cooperation isn't for the weak to serve the benefit of the strong. It's for the Ironically, it's for the other way around, for the strong to serve the benefit of the weak, for those who would do better as individuals to help those who wouldn't do better as individuals. It's for survival of the species as opposed to survival of the individual, which is why social Darwinism is absolute horse shit.
Yeah, I mean, even everyone's favorite new atheist, Richard Dawkins, wrote a book about this. And he's far from
far from perfect. That's that's understatement of the century.
for real, honestly. I just realized, by the way, we forgot to introduce ourselves.
This is the Vegan Anarchist, and then this is Pedro with his new channel called Welcome to Late Capitalism.
I'm Bobby, aka SB Freethinker. Hi.
And this is American Anarchist, the Khajiit. I have wares.
Oh, should I tell new reactioner about something about you that's very interesting in his mind, or no? I should reserve it. You should not say it at all.
We should wait. Well, if we're going to take questions, we should probably wait until the end. And,
Yeah, just like side note the questions or something for later.
maybe think before. I mean, I don't know. It's okay. I don't know. I do at some point want to talk about like more morality as like a construct and how it intersects with classism. But I was wondering if either Ross or Vegan had any topics they wanted to talk about.
No, let's talk about that. That'll be an interesting thing to talk about.
All right, Bobby, do you feel like we like discussed sufficiently when you wanted to talk about the psychology of authoritarianism? Anything else you
Yeah.
wanted to? Okay. All right. Okay. So I want to talk about morality as a social construct and how it impacts class infrastructure and like how it impacts how we view class in society. And so a lot of in sociology, basically, morality is often seen as something that exists alongside virtues, social conventions, and the law. And that the law is basically morality that has been so sufficiently violated that we are justified in using force against you to enforce this morality. So, as an extension of that, we can look at what society deems to be crimes and what society deems to be immoral. The further we look into this, oftentimes these are behaviors that are associated with people that have addictions, behaviors associated with people that don't have economic means, behaviors associated with people that are suffering from severe impoverishment, or oftentimes mental illness, to like intersect with Satanism and ableism as well. And also the legal infrastructure enforces this through a police system that protects the interests of the private and wealthy ruling class. I was wondering if any of you guys had anything to say about that.
Like, for example, swear words like the word shit, for example, have historically what happened was that England was conquered by the Normans, and the Normans subjugated the Anglo-Saxons who were basically invaded before. And the commoners said things like pig, and then the Normans, who are basically French, basically call it pork, and basically a lot of words that are associated with the common or Anglo-Saxons were often considered bad words over time due to classes associations.
It was seen as like, oh, that filthy heathen language.
Or like rap music.
Those heathen pagans with their shit. Don't they know that it is called poo?
Or rap music.
I just imagine it that way. Like, I know that probably was never said, but I mean, that was essentially like the rationale behind it, is that the heathen pagans call it shit. Why would you call it shit? Why would you speak like a heathen? Are you not a good Christian?
I was going to say, we often see how this impacts like political philosophy as well. So a lot of right-wing philosophy is based upon like natural rights and similar deontological claims. A lot of the justification for like capitalist political philosophy is based upon the idea that poverty is the result of the moral indifference and laziness of individual like people in the lower class and in the marketplace, and that the only way that somebody could ever, come into poverty would be if they had a morally indefensible ignorance or through some other fault of their own character, and completely neglects to see how poverty is like a social construction and an aspect of a system that exists.
Poverty is an effective management system, a mechanism of control to whip the workers into obedience, basically, and to keep those profits yummy, yummy. Anything you want to say, Bobby?
Yeah, like as I was saying, fasc- um, fascism fascism is um like people tend to sort of define um fascism specifically or solely by like its racist elements, but fascism is broader than that, and in general, what fascism um um what fascism is really about is in essence the glorification of normalcy, the glorification of tradition, the um the the um the resistance to progress. And whilst we whilst people like to think of themselves as liberal, progressive, anarchist, anti-authoritarian, or whatever, we all need to recognize that we all have fascistic tendencies. We all, that is to say, um, we all have a desire to stick to what we know rather than advancing and progressing beyond that. We all have a certain um a certain resistance to the diverse, a resistance to progress that we need to be conscious of and fight against.
Even within the left, there are
Jesus, Bobby, you really swallowed that blue pill.
Yeah, we like to. Wait, the blue pill is actually red that's been coated blue, and the red pill is actually blue that's been coated red. It's just they choose to deceive us. Also, it's not just red; it's red and black. We also took the green and black pill.
You know I'm making a joke, right?
Yeah, I think he's making a joke.
You looked a bit too much into it.
To get back to what Bobby was saying, that I would say that fascism is also not necessarily defined by its racism and its nativism, but also defined by a very idealized sense of the ultranation, a sense of the people in their traditional prime are at their strongest when they have reached this kind of platonic ideal of sorts of what their identity or heritage means, as nebulous as that may or may not be.
Sounds essentialist.
Of course, I mean it's it's extremely essentialist. It's fairly idealistic and, dare I say, utopian, but in kind of not the same way that we often think of utopias.
Where we think of utopias as like positive.
Yeah. So, but I mean, oftentimes in fascist rhetoric, you see appeals to like a kind of progressive third positionist utopia that has eschewed like the corrupt, wealthy, like multicultural class, and
Those multiculturalists.
and eschewed those god darn degenerate leftists. So the problem then says, rather than a social examination of our culture, let's engage in a cultural examination, and let's basically glorify the past. And another aspect of that.
Well, let's glorify the past is also part of how it came to be named fascism. I mean, fascism was based off of the word fasces, which was the word for a bundle of sticks, which I find it very funny that the words faggot and fascist have the same roots in the idea of a bundle of sticks, but they have different contexts. The idea that if you bundle a bunch of sticks together, it's stronger than dealing with just one stick. It was the idea of uniting.
It's symbolic of the organic theory that they go
Well,
by.
it comes from like Roman and like Latin. It comes from Latin and like the It comes from like Roman ideals, the ideals of like the Roman Empire, and I mean that was essential. And also, look at where fascism actually started. It started in Italy. Yeah, I mean it spread to Germany.
Actually,
I think
political fascism started in Italy, but the ideology, the ideology itself, and even a blueprint for the anti-Semitism and Islamophobia that would come to characterize neo-Nazism were kind of foreshadowed by this little-known English journalist who was very Eurocentric, anti-communist, very critical of what he saw as an increasingly pro-poor, increasingly pro-multicultural, increasingly anti-imperialist UK, and he wanted to return to essentially the white-dominated, Christian-dominated, monarchical UK of the past.
Yep, I would identify fascism as essentially pining for the past.
I don't know about that, Ross.
That's not. No, I don't think that's it.
Yeah,
not completely, but I mean that seems to be a characteristic.
If I would say there's one of the most characteristics of fascism, it has to be the organicism. That's where the symbol comes from. It's basically viewing like individual classes as part of a whole that works like an organism, that like a part of the body. The way it's that. Organicist worldview is what fascism, the seed where a lot of it grows out of.
Something I really want to say, though, to kind of jump off what Bobby was saying earlier, is that fascism also has its roots in liberal nationalism and civic nationalism of the late 19th century. So I don't want to let the rational skeptic TM liberals off the hook here. Just because there are people that have, you know, like somewhat quote unquote anti.
I'm a civic nationalist.
Hold up, I'm talking. Just because there are some people that have like quote unquote anti-racist politics does not mean that, you know, they are not subject to the same thing, and that fascism has a lot more to do with like a kind of a collective obligation to the society, as well as a moral absolutism that is universally imposed on all the members of the society. So this was a philosophy often espoused by like classical liberals and people who saw themselves as enlightened, trying to, in essence, get their monarchs and lords to kind of curb the threat of capitalism by having an excessive duty to the nation state.
Well, this probably has a lot to, or I'm going to say this probably has a lot to do with why it appeals to some people as some form of a third positionism, despite the fact that fascism in reality is in no way a third position. It's not this third position. It's a completely far right ideology. It's not somehow.
Oh yeah, like the whole third position thing was big, like the like third positionism was never a mainstream position within Nazism, and in fact, like the Hitlerite authorities of Nazism suppressed third positionism rather
The
quickly.
Strasserites.
This whole idea that Nazism and third positionism are synonymous is bullshit. It's revisionistic as hell.
Fascism often tie into the business class. Even though the rhetoric does invoke somewhat like, you know, pseudo-syndicalist, you know, rhetoric and oh, these goddamn wealthy elites, it comes from a very different place than an actual Marxian or leftist or green ecological criticism
Oh yeah.
of structure and of the economy. So it's not the same.
They're more than happy to use leftist language. I mean, because leftist language works.
It's a sense of the fact that they have to appeal to a national populism. So they appeal to like kind of somewhat recognizable.
Well, the thing is, like, as well.
Wait, can we let Pedro speak? Oh, sorry, let Bobby speak.
The thing is, vegan, you have to keep in mind that that like a lot of the symbols like a lot of the symbols like a lot of the symbols and language that we consider quote unquote leftist today, we consider these concepts and symbols that way because we've been so exposed to like Western propaganda and like anti-communist American, British, whatever, like propaganda that came about after the war, and during the time fascists were in power. Yes, these a lot of these symbols, a lot of these symbols, uh, a lot of these symbols, and a lot of these symbols and terms were being used by the left, but like a lot of but a lot of it goes back to traditions that that but like a lot of this language goes back to traditions that far predate Marxism, and unlike modern conservatives and like ANCAPs, fascists were well aware of this. And so like they weren't, and so like part of it was a tactical co-option of leftist symbols and language, but there was also the fact that you have to keep in mind that a lot of these symbols and terms far predated the radical leftist and Marxist and anarchist usages of them.
Well, yeah, but what was right wing back in those days? What was right wing today was left wing back in those days.
No, that's bullshit.
According to Gaelic neo-reactionary.
Vegan. Well, there's always been like a, you know, with the dawn of capitalism, you had the dawn of like a socialist movement, and a lot of modern day left wing is, you know, constructed around the socialist movements. But there were always radical traditions and anti-colonial traditions going far, far back, and liberalism and libertarian or right-wing libertarianism at least always had their opponents, even going back to like the Renaissance and earlier. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily true.
Gaelic neo-reactionaries like fascists and reactionaries were anti-capitalist before it was cool. Yeah, but not in a good way though. Your response to that?
Like,
Not that we were doing question time right now, but okay.
Okay, no, we're not doing question time. We'll do it later.
Like the reason that fascists were like the reason that fascists were like at all anti-capitalist, or at least in rhetoric, had nothing to do with the fact that they were opposed to capitalism's exploitative nature, as Marxists and anarchists are. In fact, fascists in general tend to think that capitalism's exploitative nature is a wonderful thing, because in their eyes it prioritizes the strong getting ahead and the weak getting left behind, and like fascists are all for that ideal. They're very much social Darwinists, and as I've stressed on multiple occasions, social Darwinism has nothing to do with proper Darwinism or biological evolution. Indeed, like many social Darwinists, Hitler included, rejected biological evolution entirely. And Hitler was, no matter how Christian apologists will try to spin or deny it, a younger creationist. I mean, he wasn't quite a younger creationist. I mean, he did kind of I mean, he did kind of have some elements of older creationism, but he certainly was not a proper Darwinist in any sense.
Yeah. Honestly, right now, like, we could use a little weed. I'm joking. Let's use the morality of drugs are bad, so don't ever do drugs unless ban all the drugs to illustrate a class conflict within the morality of drugs are evil.
Yeah, I think that's a good example of that. So, with certain the uses of certain drugs are criminalized under certain circumstances, and often to make specific political enemies.
Yep. Note pot versus alcohol. Pot was specifically associated with and
Hippies and blacks.
yep, it was well, actually, the black association was made with heroin back when they first criminalized pot, which was also why they criminalized both of them heavily. They wanted to make political enemies out of specifically people who would not vote for Nixon, which would be the hippies, the liberal hippies, and the black community. So they created this association that isn't necessarily there either. Look at and so like if you look at pot, it was associated with liberals and it was associated with more working class people. Alcohol, everybody has a drink once in a while, and a lot of it is like really expensive and really associated with rich men. So it was like we can't criminalize alcohol, even though alcohol's effects are probably more extensive than those of marijuana or those of pot.
Yeah, in fact, if you compare to all the illegal, like huge chunks of the illegal drugs like tobacco and alcohol, it's still more dangerous than most illegal drug substances. And then not on top of the fact that those substances would be a lot safer if legal anyways, because you wouldn't have black market guys just trying to put whatever shit in there to make more money by diluting it.
Yep.
Like you wouldn't have crocodile, for example.
But I mean, Pedro probably had an even better example of political enemies being made by drugs.
Or morality being used by the powerful to subject the underclasses. Disadvantage.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
yeah, it's no secret that morality is like defined by the enlightened philosophers that very extensive educations and could afford extensive education. Vegan. What is that noise?
Oh, sorry.
Another example would be, the criminalization of opiates. Primarily when we're bringing in East Asian immigrants for what qualifies as, I would argue, slave labor, to create the national infrastructure of our society. And then, of course, you had the Yellow Scare and immigration frenzy leading to the criminalization of opium. And of course, the political and economic dimensions of that as well.
Or like in the modern example, saggy pants.
Well, yeah, there you go. There's another example. It's a way to push the responsibility off of having to look critically upon the society and say, hey, you know what's wrong with society? There are some people that just aren't very good people. It's a fundamentally reductive way to look at the ills and problems with how we organize ourselves.
That's basically Trump's philosophy, quote unquote, in a nutshell.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
At least Le Pen lost.
I looked into Putin's eyes and I saw a really good person. to quote W.
Yo, Miguel, what are you doing in here?
I got
You did put the link in the wrong chat.
Yeah, I did.
Well,
Hey, Miguel.
hi, Miguel.
Hi, Bobby.
Miguel, why are you such an early leftist?
Also,
Mean.
Miguel, we're live on YouTube. If you don't want to be broadcasted to the world, then
I'm already broadcasted on, on Jake's live stream.
Oh, by the way, someone mentioned Reich, Marxist philosopher, and pedophilia and fascism. So I wanted you to talk about
We're into this again, aren't we?
Well, you can get out or you can talk about it.
let's not.
No, this is not appropriate in this channel.
All right.
Seriously, Megan, I feel like we spoke about this before, and why there are certain things we cannot hold you in trust.
I'm really shitty at keeping secrets. But anyways, get back into the whole discussion.
Who votes for who votes for sending vegan to jail? I say aye.
I
All right,
Aye.
the ayes have it.
Is it jail or gulag?
It's gulag. You get you get a free 10 years in camp.
Yay!
Free camp for 10 years because camp is so expensive these days.
I know.
there are only 2 books you're allowed to
Back
read.
in the days of the USSR, camp was very cheap. I mean, you got 10 years for free. I don't know where you're gonna get a better deal.
There's only 2 books you're allowed to read: the Holy Bible and Hamlet.
The Holy Bible and the Wealth of Nations. Oh, and I guess von Mises. That's it.
No. Only one book allowed, and that is Atlas Shrugged.
That's worse than prison.
Exactly. It qualifies as torture, which is the point.
If I've actually visited prisons, I think I'd rather stay there than read Atlas Shrugged again.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
At,
As
I
someone
am
who's
proud
actually,
to
as
say
someone,
I have never read Atlas Shrugged, but just from the reviews I know it, and just from the reviews and the interviews with the author, I could tell it was a shitty book.
yeah. Well, I'm just going to say, I am someone who has actually spent time in a jail cell before. It was less than a day and it was a couple of hours, but I've spent time in a jail cell. I'd rather spend years in a cell, years in prison, than read Atlas Shrugged again.
God damn. You guys sure do love to exaggerate. Anyways, to get back.
Have you actually read Atlas Shrugged?
Yes, I've read all of Rand's works.
So then you know why it's not really much of an exaggeration then.
It's only a slight exaggeration.
Well, at least for me it is. And I'm like, no, I actually read that crap. I've actually read Rand's work. Dying or staying in a jail cell with no television and probably like freaking like rusty like bars is far more better than reading that shit.
We're getting super off topic. Anyways, to get back to what we were talking about, I think I want to talk about moral absolutism a bit here, and
Oh, that's fun. I would rant all the time about moral absolutism and how stupid it is when I was a mutualist.
Yeah. So moral absolutism is another huge component of far right wing and right wing ideologies. the idea that there is an objective morality that should be universally imposed in all situations across all cultures to every person. I think we all here agree that that's fundamentally ridiculous.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So
That sounds totally legit.
it's necessary, though, to prop up a lot of right-wing political philosophy. So it's a foundation of natural rights law. It's a foundation of a lot of deontological ethics. With the exception of David Friedman,
Boo! Deontology. Boo!
I used to be a deontological vegan. And I say fuck that shit.
Can you guys let Pedro speak, please?
I was just going to say, with the exception of David Friedman, I've never seen a libertarian person even because their justification for contractual law and a natural law society and self ownership also really super spooky universal rights that apply to all people that they just arbitrarily give themselves.
Yep.
It's the foundation, I would dare say, the foundation of their entire political philosophy. And the same thing goes with the authoritarian right as well, and that's the mandate that they use with which to wield political force and to create a homogenous national identity that they artificially construct to fit their own ends. And then they push that identity as a narrative onto the rest of society.
Hence why we need postmodernism.
Exactly.
Postmodernism is good, and also, Miguel, if you're gonna be an early leftist, you might as well not be here.
I don't know if Miguel's an early leftist. I don't fucking know.
I don't even know what the hell that means.
All right, well, go watch episode 1, you noob. Anyways, Bobby, do you have anything you want to say about moral absolutism?
Yeah, moral absolutism very much comes out of fundamentally flawed and reductionist religious assumptions about human nature that are scientifically and philosophically invalid. And have no basis in the natural world whatsoever, and natural human behavior that we can observe whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, unlike what right libertarians say, property isn't a natural thing; it's a normative thing.
Right, exactly. And most of the things that we treat as natural qualities and natural quantities are in fact normative qualities or quantities.
A lot of right-wing fundamentalists love to use moral absolutism, but just claim it because I'm God in the Bible, the Quran.
Yeah, and the funny thing is a lot of these is a lot of these right wingers will concede the point that without the belief in God, there is absolutely no justification for moral absolutism, and so they cling to both. They cling to both ideas.
Yeah, I have to agree.
What normative and morality the alt-right likes to use, and what are some good ways to deconstruct it? deconstruction, man. But yeah, I mean, even a lot of the left sometimes would fall into the trap of using like rights and moral absolutism for their own ends.
I completely agree. I mean, if I had a dime for every like left-wing altruist that I've met, not a big fan of that either, at all. Not a
Even
big fan of the kind of like I would say almost neo-colonial morality that must be imposed from primarily European philosophy onto the rest of the world, and then they call themselves leftists, or when
or
they say
even oh.
yeah, or when they say there's only one justifiable way to go about engaging in a class struggle.
No, you can't be violent.
Well, yeah, like, or within the animal rights community or animal liberation, they use
Yeah, like,
rights theory a lot, all the freaking time. And the utilitarian vegans are not that much better either, but the rights vegans are like,
I mean,
oh,
no, even um, even Jake, like, he's a little better at this than most YouTube leftists, but even he sometimes falls into like a a very European style political and philosophical thought mode, and 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 like he like even they um tend to even they tend to use some essentialist um some essentialist like norms in arguing against ANCAP, even though they also do criticize size essentialism on a philosophical level. So yeah, they definitely seem to have some cognitive dissonance in that particular area.
so how can the post-colonial, the animal liberation, the ecological, the social justice, the left as a whole move past these moral absolutist social construct that has very little basis in actual reality?
I would say we need to give the
I don't care about this idea of reality.
True, it's a social construct.
Like, to me, reality is just an abstract term that uh, is thrown around by some of the worst, most vapid, intellectually bankrupt, pseudo-intellectual fucks in the world.
And
Like, just pretentious, unlikable, uncharismatic, like just irredeemably standoffish and like assholes.
you were saying, Pedro?
yeah. To some extent, I can agree with Bobby on like the idea of reality often being used to justify like harsh authoritarian or right wing causes. I tend to use the term real, but when I say real, I often mean like direct, local, and material. Because I consider myself an anti-idealist, and so for me, I was going.
Not me. I'm a proud idealist.
Okay. I consider like I basically well but that's an interesting conversation for another day. I don't really know how you divorce idealism from essentialism.
Yeah, it sounds early leftist, but continue.
Say sounds early left. No, I'm just kidding. I for me, I was going to say though, I think a lot of the decision-making process as to the ethics and well, I don't care much for the morality, but as to the ethics of the problem solving of this situation has to be given back to the local level, and that we need to have the people that are directly involved in the conflicts be the ones that decide how to go about resolving the conflicts, rather than having an abstract moral framework or ethical framework, you know, like imposed upon them from upon high. You know, especially this applies to liberals, it applies to right wingers, it can apply to leftists too. The idea that, you know, if you've got a moral hammer, you'll start seeing everything as nails. This idea that you can somehow solve all problems with a single universally applicable framework doesn't seem particularly realistic to me. It doesn't seem.
Yeah,
It takes
I mean, I wouldn't use the term realistic. I mean, I'd prefer like practical or something like that. And I have problems with the concept of practicality as well, but they're not as bad as my problems with the term realism.
All right. I mean, I'm opposed to political realism, economic realism, biological realism, all of those like similarly named movements.
Except for technological realism. Techno-realism.
But I will say, yeah, I think that if we go about trying to solve problems in those ways, we're not taking into account the diversity of human experience. Is there anything any of you guys want to add on to that?
I guess
Yeah.
we could talk a little bit about Nietzsche and like existentialism, and how we could free ourselves.
Oh, vegan. That actually reminds me, I've been looking at like a lot of dark enlightenment websites because I'm a fucking masochist apparently. And yeah, like it's interesting, like the dark enlightenment, like these people basically like their reactionary politics are shit, but it's weird. Like I actually do agree with them to a certain extent that that the Enlightenment tends to be overly glorified within our society, and I wouldn't say like some of them do that we need to like go back to like just this ideal of a primitive like monarchical patriarchy.
Yeah, well, of course, I'm very skeptical of the Enlightenment, and I think most of us here, I don't know about Miguel, are skeptical of the Enlightenment. I mean, but we don't use that as an excuse to justify like fucking monarchy, though.
No.
We try to improve things. We don't agree with like the Enlightenment notion of progress because, well, I think that way the Enlightenment kind of implicitly defines progress. Basically entails raping the earth and anybody you can for out of anything it can offer you, and it's not as a it basically has this mindset that's inherently anti-ecological and anti-animal, including human animal, not just non-human animals.
Right. Miguel, do you have anything to add on to that?
About existentialism or moral absolutism?
Um, both.
Well, okay, on the moral absolutism or concept, well, I mean, when it comes to that issue of moral absolutism, we usually refer to it about in terms of religion. But with anything in this life, it could also be applied to secular philosophical arguments. For example, if one to talk about nonviolence, I often advocate
Oh yeah.
Oh
nonviolence
yeah.
usually have a very moral absolutist stance in terms of non-violence. In terms of if you decide to take a violent position, you are either equally as immoral as your oppressor or opponent, or you are or you are somehow, you know, immoral for concocting, or I mean, for applying the same level of violence that other people are
Right.
imposing onto you. It's almost always some sort of really rather vague and confusing argument that the nonviolence crowd tends to have that is very absolute, and there's almost always some stipulation to why they believe this. Well, whereas whereas religion has God, nonviolence crowd has the the argument of you are morally lesser or you're just as morally less.
Yeah.
There's always some vague reasoning behind.
And they would often like quote MLK or Gandhi out of context.
And yes, and that is problematic because, but not unsurprising because, well, folks like because folks like MLK might not have spoken about being violent in a rather mindless way that people would think about. MLK understood why people would riot. He understood that. He wasn't trying to tone police them, or he wasn't trying to invalidate their experiences. He understood why.
Exactly. And and
MLK even
yeah, like
specifically said that you can't expect me to condemn riots and not condemn the conditions that would cause people to riot.
Yeah, a lot of liberals do just that.
Well, I would argue that within liberal philosophy, there's this rather contradictory view in terms of violence. Violence to a liberal, at least in mainstream liberal discourse, is often seen as something that is wrong and should not be condoned. That being said, for some reason, the liberal doesn't seem to have an issue with perpetuating violence if it comes from the state. Like,
right.
often
Well,
whether that comes
depending
in.
upon depending upon the type of liberal, like I mean, like all liberals, all liberals justify state violence to a certain degree, but like a classical liberal would probably justify state violence to a somewhat lesser extent than a social liberal would.
Or an ANCAP or even do less, but their violence is because of a nap.
But the thing is, I mean, sure, they might be against violence when it comes to certain things. But if you look throughout liberalism's history, you realize that, well, many liberal thinkers were quite the exceptions when it came to certain things. For example, let's
Oh
talk
yeah,
about John Stuart Mill. Well, he often talked about ideas like the harm principle, he didn't really necessarily have much of an issue, downplaying the atrocities of the colonialism of the British Empire against the Indians in India. Um, there was also John C. Calhoun, who often spoke about freedom and all this stuff and states' rights, but yet he was one of the biggest proponents of slavery during his time.
Oh yeah, that was very common in those days.
You know, I mean, often.
Like if you look at if you look at the further back and like the further back you look at the Democratic Party's history, the more hypocritical their name looks. I mean, their name is hypocritical even today. It's just in a more subtle way. But the but yeah, and the same with the Republican Party, by the way, because a lot of people in the Republican Party, especially in the time of Trump, are very much anti-diversity, despite the fact, if you look at the historical definition of republicanism, it requires diversity to function at all.
Yeah. Well, even like I know, I don't like to use like appeal to nature fallacies, but a lot of right wingers,
Guys, we must preserve Mumford and Sons.
a lot of writers like to use appeal to nature fallacy, and well, they also coincidentally happen to be the ones who are against diversity. But when you look at nature, using your appeal to nature fallacy, you would realize, well, the whole natural system is predicated on diversity. It's diverse, but in a weird way, there's unity. So, well, I mean, so even by right wing's own appeal to nature fallacy used to justify hierarchies, they would have to switch up their views on like all sorts of stuff about diversity real fast.
The thing is, like, American right wingers are not like proper right wingers like you'd find in Europe, and that's not to say like they're basically bigots hiding behind right wing moral and political justifications, right? They're and that's not to say that there aren't like right wing bigots in Europe, because there are a lot
Cough,
of them.
Nigel Farage.
But at the but yeah, at the same time, like, I find it so funny that American Republicans can claim to be like all about republicanism and liberty, but when it comes to the borders, oh, we gotta close those shut because
Mexicans taking our jobs, terrorists.
that, which isn't even true, by the way. Like, if you look at Mexican American employment in this country, like, it's not like even it's not like even close to.
But yeah, guys, my immigrants are taking the jobs, even though it's actually the rich fuck to sign to screw you over, they can screw over this poor guy even harder than they could do to you. So,
Yep, and yep, in fact, um,
in fact, the world isn't flat, contrary to the flat earthers. Vaccines do work, and they don't cause autism. And even
yeah,
if that does, that's not the worst thing ever. It's better than getting fucking polio. I mean, I have the the three of us here have autism. It's not that bad of a deal, anyway.
I
So.
have high functioning Asperger's technically,
Didn't
which
the
is on the
DSM?
spectrum, but
Yeah, didn't the DSM did some funny things with the spectrum? Anyways,
They did.
yeah,
Yes,
well, I don't care. Like I'm still gonna call myself an Aspie because that's what I've always called myself. And
I'm mad at the DSM for erasing my Asperger's.
well, yeah, like you don't have, the thing is you don't have to acknowledge or give credence to that shit.
Also, I feel like it stigmatizes mental illness. Also, we're getting off topic. Anyways, let's look at the comments and answer those questions. Oh God.
Okay. Miss Sandy, questions you feel like answering? Or is it all bad? At least we don't have a Dapperton invasion this time.
Yeah, good to see Dapperton reactionaries on here. Punk Rock Trucker says EWAS is founded by capitalists for capitalists, liberal Masons for liberal Masons for liberal. Okay, I don't know what the fuck. Having to say the Irish were part of the racist wing of the Democratic Party back in the day. Oh God.
I want to reject a certain notion, and I want to put this back towards you guys. The idea that fascism is in fact not
Europe does right wing properly. Oh, what?
the idea that fascism in fact does not invoke moral absolutism. I mean, it's not impossible for me to imagine an amoral fascism. You know, I could see it. I see some aspects of that in the Dark Enlightenment at times. But I think it's kind of revisionistic to say that, like, the historical analysis of fascism would lead us to anything other than moral absolutism being center to that ideology. You know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like one of the main justifications neo-Nazis give for their anti-Semitism um and their racism in general is that and and this is pretty much across the board with racists and homophobes and bigots of all stripes, um, is um, is this mentality of moral absolutism. It's this mentality that the European conception of morality and the Christian conception of morality is flawless, absolute, and needs to be applied to everyone regardless of environment, regardless of circumstances, regardless of situation.
Guys, freedom, liberalism requires a border and a strong ethnic foundation for wishes to grow. Also, someone else says the fact there are laws of physics invokes more absolutism.
Yeah, sorry, that's dumb.
Yeah.
I don't even think that warrants a response. It's
I
just
saw that
completely
too.
dumb, does not follow. Non sequitur.
I thought that was really funny. The laws of physics invokes moral absolutism. Well, okay, so I guess like quantum uncertainty then invokes moral nihilism. What's your point? I don't get it.
I just found out that I could remove people from the chat myself, so I removed Gaelic Reactionary.
Yeah, I had you as a moderator. You didn't know you were I had you as a moderator?
You told me that you had me as a moderator for your channel, and then I saw the thing that showed moderation for Pedro, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I can probably do this.
Now they're going to say that we're an echo chamber, box, safe space.
Who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
But Ross, we hurt their feelings.
Anyways, we're gonna leave the chat now. I mean, it's been 2 hours.
Well, I mean, we're making up for missed time. We haven't done an episode in 3 goddamn weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want, we can head out now if you want to. Sure.
Any closing remarks?
Yeah, I said this chat is kind of a dumpster fire, and the Andromeda Blade said you're not wrong.
All right.
We have a question from Ben Tipper. Does the objection of more absolutism mean there can be no basis of objective morality?
I reject an objective morality. I also reject, like, I don't reject the existence of morality, but I reject its importance. So I call myself a moral relativist. I'm far more concerned with ethical solutions to problems and how to actually deal with, like, conflict resolution rather than what we ought to do. That's just me.
Yeah, like I feel like the whole animal movement and the vegan movement should move from like moralism, which is honestly like pissing people off, to moving to more of an ethical solution, ethics-based movement.
Okay, Lonely Wolf 1980 said right-wing morality, also known as selective outrage.
Yeah.
Lonely Wolf, you get a shout out. I like you. All right. Also, in case Jake didn't hear earlier, I'm pretty sure Bobby just made the Late Leftist podcast declare war on Red and Black Revolutionary. So the Late Leftists are coming to get you early leftist Cindy's.
And Platties.
Oh, yeah. Again, he said, it's only satire. It's only satire if I make a joke, but if you make a joke, I take it literally.
Yep, that's how it works.
That's how reactionaries work. It's satire if I make a joke, but if you make a joke, I take it literally.
Yeah, that's reactionaries in a nutshell for ya.
Anyways, this is
guys, remember, MRA stands for misogynistic racist asshole.
This is the vegan anarchist. No meat, no milk, no masters. See ya.
This is Bobby, aka Aspie Free Thinker, Liberty, Equality, Fraternity, goodbye.
And
I am
yeah,
American anarchist. I have wares. Goodbye.
This is Pedro, aka Welcome to Late Capitalism. See ya, I guess.
Miguel.
And yeah, that was Miguel.
Yes. Yes.
You're sign out.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. This is Miguel, also known as the Scholarly Socialist. Over and out.
Peace.